Groovy. Resident Evil.
While some of the soldiers cauterized Landis's wounds, other soldiers tried to save Dante, but it was of no use. He bled out too quickly, and too much of his throat was torn out to be saved, leaving the soldiers' hands stained with the blood of their fallen comrade. They began questioning Supervisor Carpenter as to what had just transpired, but he tried evading their questions and feigned complete ignorance.
So let me get this good and straight. This woman was eating that man, and you fucking expect us to believe you had no idea what was happening here?
Lieutenant Conrad asked Supervisor Carpenter, his rage taking over.
No, I had no idea it would be this bad or widespread. We didn't expect him to be dying and returning from the dead. Umbrella had no idea this was possible. We didn't even know the T-virus could cause the cannibal disease until July of this year.
Carpenter answered, accidentally letting slip the T-virus can cause the cannibal disease. The cannibal disease had been talked about on the news from reports from ex-STARS officer Jill Valentine, here in Raccoon City. The story she told the Raccoon Press made it all over the country in late July and early August, even becoming international news. Cannibalistic murders wasn't your everyday occurrence, so naturally it was a hot story. Jill's claims were laughed at despite her partners corroborating the same story. It didn't matter to her. Jill was always a justice-driven individual, which is why she joined the military and became a cop in the first place. She didn't have many options to try and show Umbrella as the evil entity it was, so she tried telling the truth without evidence to support her claims. She became known as the town fool. No one wanted to believe a company the world was so hopelessly dependent on could be malicious to begin with. This angered her partner, Chris Redfield, even more, sending him into a drunken rage where he hit another officer, which, honestly, didn't help their cause. Since their suspension, Chris had spent his time drunk in the bottom of a bottle, driven only by his hate for Umbrella and their destruction of their lives. They came up with a plan of attack against the Umbrella Corporation, although Umbrella had their claws into everything, so this wasn't going to be an easy task. From a source, they learned about another lab in Europe, much larger than the one they found hidden away in the Arclight Forest. This led him to leave for Europe before the outbreak. His partners were to meet him there later, but they never made it. However, this tale isn't about the stars. The soldiers' knowledge base was limited, so they didn't know much about the goings-on in Umbrella, or exactly how the bioweapons were made. The one tidbit of information that was slipped to some of the soldiers was the T-virus created the bioweapons. The soldiers that knew this knew what he meant by the T-virus causing the cannibal disease. Although Conrad wasn't sure all the soldiers knew, but him, Rodriguez, and a few others who had survived a mission or two, passing it around within Platoon D by word of mouth.
No, I don't buy it. But it's not like we really have much choice at this point. We don't really have time to fight with each other,
Rodriguez retorted. With Dante already dead and Landis injured, this mission was heading south, but they didn't have time to dwell. A scraping noise began at the back door, causing the 10 men left alive to refocus their attention to the issues at hand. Conrad hurriedly goes to peek out the back door, hoping it is a survivor attempting to get in somewhere to hide. No such luck. He peeks out and sees about 7 of the dead in the alley, looking for their next meal. Maybe more with what little he could see through the crack of the open door. A hand quickly pops in through the thin opening as he tries shutting it. Before he has time to react, another hand pops in. Rodriguez comes over to help push the door shut. Conrad grabs out his hatchet and whacks at the first hand. A clean cut. The first hand falls to the floor with a gooey sound, as pus and rot expelled out. Another swing and the last hand falls to the floor. Conrad noticed this hand seemed more solid than the other, and nowhere near as rotten. With both hands cleaved, they can close the door, locking it. Moans continuing from the dead citizens as they do.
We need to leave out the way we came. We'll have to find another path,
Carpenter ordered. The troop heads back to the dining room, just to see the dead had fixated themselves to the glass windows like giant insects, while more in the back began pushing into them. Carpenter looked puzzled. All the men began looking around, frantically trying to come up with a plan, as if they were forced to play a deadly version of Beat the Clock. Before they could formulate a plan, the situation got worse. Time's up. Now they had to face the consequences. The window to Conrad's left is the first to crack, and a zombie spilled in. The way the window broke, the zombie had its exposed belly slit open by the glass as he fell on its jagged edge, spilling coagulated, dark blood down the glass and wall beneath the window. 2 zombies poured in behind it. One was missing half its cheek, and the other, an arm. They clumsily climbed over the one on the glass, trampling it, causing it to slice itself open even further. Before they had a chance to react, the glass to the right shattered, and more zombies made their way into the 12-table dining room. Funny thing is, this was the first time Raccoon citizens were able to get past the restaurant's small atrium without a reservation once in advance. On tonight's menu was the new hot thing in the city, all you can eat, long pig. Conrad yelled out, "Knock the rest of the tables over! Get into defensive position!" The men listened to the lieutenant and did just that. They began firing.
Remember to shoot them in the head!
Williamson yelled, his southern drawl emanating
The corpses began hitting the floor, one after another, but the horde kept coming. Conrad decided not to waste any more HK-33 ammo, not knowing what they might encounter tonight. So he switched to his Glock 17 sidearm and began firing. The dead wouldn't stop coming as they kept firing. They were being overwhelmed. Suddenly a loud bang rang from behind. "Check that out," Carpenter called out, sending 3 soldiers back to the kitchen. The loud bang was more zombies breaching the lock, knocking the door to the ground, and falling inside.
"We've got company back here too!"
Landis reported. "Okay, protect each other, stay tight." The dead was coming from both sides now, and the UBCS was the meat in this nightmarish dinner of death. The 3 soldiers began backing their way into the dining room. One crouched down, the other 2 standing next to each other firing. Didn't much matter. Too many were coming. The dead had reached the 3 soldiers, and 2 of them were engulfed by the dead and eaten. Leaving Landis alive, Landis quickly backed up, unable to help the fallen soldiers.
No!
He screamed as he fired his gun full blast into the herd. The soldiers had to find a way out fast before they joined the horde of hungry living dead. Carpenter ordered the men to split up, half to focus on the front and the rest on the back in a tight formation. Conrad's Glock clicks. He needed to reload. The atrium is now full of the dead, but the zombies in the back had stopped coming for them. They were too distracted as they ate the freshly dead soldiers. New zombies pouring in from the kitchen were kneeling to join in on the meal. Like a pack of starving wolves gathered around their prey. With the zombies in the back too focused on devouring the fallen soldiers, Conrad quickly devised a plan. They needed to exit out the front as fast as possible, before they had to contend with the ones in the back again too. "Throwing a grenade! Everyone down!" Conrad yelled, as he lobs a frag grenade into the entrance at the encroaching horde. The explosion was almost deafening, echoing off the walls of the dining room around him. He ignored the ringing in his head and stood up again, balancing himself. Pieces of the dead were everywhere, blood and body parts strewn all around the room. The door and part of the wall was blown wide open. There wasn't many dead at the front door anymore. Now was their chance. The soldiers ran outside, running over corpses on the floor, popping 3 zombies in the head as they went back onto the street. On the sidewalk, outside Raccoon's Delight, is where they saw the top of the zombie stuck in the window earlier. Without arms, only a portion of its leg, and most of its torso gone. It just turned its head, trying to get at the soldiers, like a bobbing cork caught in a river's current. They turned to look back and saw that the dead were still coming from the back of the restaurant. The dining room is again filled with the dead citizens, making their way out of the kitchen, seduced by the scent of living flesh. Carpenter turned to a middle-aged African-American soldier. This man is Platoon D's demolitions expert, Sergeant Barker. "Bring it down, Sergeant," Carpenter said calmly. Barker stepped forward and pulled C4 from his satchel. He quickly rigs it on a 10-second timer and initiates the countdown. The soldiers run across the street and duck behind some abandoned cars. Conrad covered his ears this time in preparation of the blast. The explosion was far louder than the frag grenade. The restaurant quivered and began to collapse in on itself,
crushing and blocking the dead from exiting onto the streets. Conrad was reeling. They hadn't been here longer than 4 hours, and they'd already lost 3 men. If that many citizens was infected, he felt the likelihood of finishing this mission just dropped in odds all the more. Conrad's eyes were big as panic set in. He looks down and realizes he hadn't reloaded. He ejects the empty magazine and popped in a full one. He did this more out of reflex than a controlled action. His thoughts were racing. He didn't know what to make of what had transpired. He felt sick. The feeling that this mission was a waste of time was replaced by a feeling that this was a suicide mission. He was spinning out. Just then, his supervisor begins to speak into his radio, and Conrad was able to refocus his thoughts.
This is Supervisor Carpenter of Platoon D. Can you read me? Over. This is Supervisor Carpenter. Can you read me? Over.
The first thing they hear is static, followed by an Englishman's cold and direct voice on the other end.
We read you. Bad connection. Over.
It's worse than we expected. The cannibal disease is here in this city. The riots are no longer a concern. Things are far worse than we foresaw. We've suffered 3 casualties since landing. What are my orders? Over.
We keep hearing that from the other UBCS supervisors. Is your squad with you, or are you alone? Over.
They are here and present. Those who are still alive, at least. Over.
Carpenter calmly answered, as if it was just another day for him. He showed absolutely no signs of remorse or feelings for his fellow soldiers.
Hello. Can you still read me? Over.
Yes, this signal isn't strong. We've accelerated our schedule. We've initiated Plan B. You are to proceed with Operation Phoenix. Do you understand your orders? Over.
Operation Phoenix? Yes. Okay. I'll get it done. Over and out.
Carpenter said with a worried look on his face. Carpenter turned to his platoon and saw their confused looks.
What is our order, sir? What is Operation Phoenix?
Williamson asked, nervously.
Operation Phoenix is classified for supervisors only. It's a need-to-know basis, and as of now, you don't need to know.
This angered Conrad, but he kept his mouth shut.
How the fuck are we supposed to do our job with half the information?
He thought to himself. Carpenter orders the men to head back to the office building.
It seems using it as a base won't be viable. We all need to move together. Let's go, double time. I don't want to waste any more time here, but keep your eyes open. I don't want another surprise.
As Conrad turned to follow the soldiers back up the road, his attention was drawn to the zombie in the window earlier. He was making a haunting groan, and it was stuck on his back, motionless other than the endless bobbing of its head. The blast from Conrad's grenade had caused it to snap its spine when it hit the pavement. Tomorrow, when the sun rises, it will still be here, baking in the September heat of the Midwest. The smell from its rotting flesh, baking in the sun, will be incomparable. Delta Team arrived back at the office building, and Carpenter explained the situation. The troops' numbers went from 8 up to 12 soldiers, plus 1 survivor. Conrad noticed the soldiers seemed nervous about going onto the streets, especially after being briefed.
I'm not fucking going back out there. You can't make me. I've seen too many people fucking die out there.
Keith yells.
It's simple, sir. You can either come with us and possibly be rescued, or die here for certain. I don't really care either way. It's your choice.
Conrad was surprised at Carpenter's cold demeanor. Keith begrudgingly agreed.
Then let's move out.
Carpenter pulled out his map and began pointing.
Every team and their supervisors have their orders tonight. Our destinations are on this map. We're going to head up towards Innendale Street and take a right down this alley. Then half a click down the alley, we take another right towards Jack Street. I don't want to get stuck on that main road, and I'd like to try to bypass some of those. Carpenter was cut off before finishing.
Zombies, sir.
No! We're not calling them that, damn it! This isn't some fucking Romero movie of the week. We will call them infected or something similar to that. Anyway, I want to bypass the infected. Let's move now. I want to make up time. We don't want to miss our evac.
The men head back out and begin their ascent deeper into Raccoon City. As they made their way up the road, the sun was beginning to set, making this city all the more frightening. Within minutes, they would be shrouded in darkness, and the terrible night ahead of them would be like nothing they can imagine,
even in their wildest nightmares.
There was little dead, but up ahead a few blocks they began to find more.
Use your blades. Let's save ammo and keep down on the noise,
Conrad suggested.
That's a good idea. Last thing we need is to alert them all of our location.
Rodriguez replied as they dispatched 4 zombies. By the time they got to the alley, they could see up ahead closer to Innendale Street. There was another building on fire, corpses on sidewalks, and about 12 of the dead was congregating on the street, looking for their next meal. The whole scene haunted Conrad. Nothing in his past could have ever prepared him for this. To his left, he spotted a newspaper machine with big words on the front page saying, "The Dead Walk." The image sent chills down his spine as he saw one of the dead feasting on a young female corpse, like a 3-day starved prisoner being offered his last meal. In a car, illuminated by the yellow streetlight it had ran into, he saw one had been burned, but it was still moving. The flesh was burned, but the brain remained intact, so it was still alive. It had to be in immeasurable agony. His eyes were drawn to another corpse on the street, ate down to the bone. It looked like scraps from a steak dinner you'd bring home to your dog, with small traces of meat here and there, but mostly picked clean. Only a small portion of its chest and head was untouched. To his horror, he realized it was moving its mouth and blinking. It was still not alive or dead, but something terrible in between. In this moment, this purgatory seemed like the worst fate possible. The entire city was now bathed in pale moonlight from the full moon overhead, making this vision of terror all the more macabre. Conrad silently hoped to himself their next destination is safer than Raccoon's Delight. Delta Team is successful in bypassing the dead behind the restaurant, They emerge onto Jack Street. They see their destination a little ways up the road. A gigantic, diamond-shaped building. It towers over everything. No, towering doesn't quite describe its obnoxious size. It's more like lording over everything, with a large word umbrella lit up on the outside.
A testament to Umbrella's bloated ego,
Conrad thinks to himself.
There's our destination. Come on,
Carpenter urged. Conrad cared little for saving Umbrella workers, knowing they were the one who caused this. However, he wouldn't go against orders. Outside of the towering building was 3 of the dead standing on the sidewalk. Landis ran forward and knocked the youngest of the 3, who was wearing a leather jacket with a Nirvana t-shirt, to the ground by ramming his massive shoulder into the zombie. He smacked into it so hard it was like being struck with a sack of potatoes. Another soldier ran over and stabbed it in the head, right at its temple with his combat knife. During this, a soldier by the name of Ackles ran over and hit a male zombie in the head with his gun. This caused it to lose its balance and almost fall. The dead citizen is wearing jean shorts and a tank top, exposing bites up and down his left arm. Ackles then hurried behind it, grabbing its arms and pulling while he shoved his knee into its back. This gave Williamson a chance to shove his knife through its head, right above his right eye, with everything in him, penetrating its skull. Black blood squirted out and onto his hand, which he wiped off on the dead man's clothes. The last zombie was a petite woman. She looked out of place, like she was dropped here from the 50s. Her hair was done up in a beehive do. Her clothes looked like a secretary's. She had horn-trimmed glasses dangling from one ear. Her face was pretty much missing. All that was left was a portion of her left cheek hanging from her skull like an ornament on a Christmas tree. Muscle was visible, exposing her grinning skull. This horrific vision made Conrad nauseous. He jumps up into the air using his weight and gravity to bring his tomahawk down into her skull. This split it almost in half, causing some of the brain to extrude out of her damaged skull. Once it was safe to proceed, the troop entered the building.
Our destination is the 12th floor, but we're going to continue checking each floor for Umbrella workers who may still be alive, so we need to hurry. We're going to use the elevator this time. I'm only taking 4 of you with me. Rodriguez, Gordon, Conrad, Ackles, you're with me,
Carpenter said as they walked over to the elevator. He turned back to the men and said,
This hopefully won't take long, and we can head to our next destination. Watch Keith, and radio me if anything happens.
Conrad felt cramped inside the small space with 4 other men and their momentous weapons, as if he was stuck in coach, in the center seat, with football players on either side of him on his way to Denver Airport. No one really wants to go there, but sometimes you have no choice. The most annoying part of this was the god-awful elevator music playing overhead, which made Conrad contemplate putting a bullet in the speaker just to shut the ear-bleeding, wretched tunes up. The building was mostly full of corpses. A few zombies were here and there. A lot of the corpses had their heads bashed in, stabbed, or a sporadic gunshot wound to the head. On the 8th floor, the soldiers exited into a very dark office space. They pulled out flashlights and propped them up against their guns. They heard nothing at first, as they made their way down the tight hallway. Many of the doors were locked. After a moment, they heard something shift. They moved forward, ready for anything. Ackles walks up to a door along the thin hallway and presses his ear to the door.
It's coming from in here.
Ackles reached down, slowly tried turning the knob. It wasn't opening.
It's not locked. It's just stuck. Give me a second.
The other 4 men are covering him with their weapons raised. Ackles pushed on the door, jiggled it, and the door finally began to move. The door fell open quickly, and with it was a male zombie in a business suit. He was in stasis mode, waiting for stimulus to trigger his attack.
Oh shit!
The falling zombie startled Ackles. The dead employee landed on his back. He then opened his white eyes and fixated on Ackles. It growled loudly. All around them they began hearing more of the dead in offices and closed doors lining the hall. On the other side of the newly opened door was a room full of cubicles, with about 50 zombies inside the dark room. Their attention is now on the soldiers, and they were all coming for them. The moans were almost deafening as they echoed off the walls. Ackles shot the one on the ground in the head before it could become a threat. Banging began on the closed doors, as all around them zombies began trying to join them in the hall.
We have to get out of here!
Gordon yelled out, overcome by fear. Supervisor Carpenter ordered them back to the elevator. But as they went to go back, the doors began breaking open, and zombies were spilling into the hall. They were coming from all directions. The soldiers began firing, and the bodies began to pile up in the thin hall. As they slowly made their way back to the elevator, so many were on the ground they were having to step over them. Conrad was still using his hatchet and making quick work of them. He was nothing if not adaptable after his past. He had to be. Such a skill was never put to the test more than now, here in this dead city. They finally had a break between them and the elevator. They weren't going to waste their chance, so they instantly run for it. A massive amount of zombies were at their back. Too many to count. There were so many they were pushing into each other and hitting the walls, as if it was a rock concert and they were trying to get at the star. Conrad frantically pushed the button, and the doors began to drag open. They were sticking. They didn't have time for this. The other 4 soldiers were firing into the horde. Black blood splattered the walls with each hit. This was no longer a military mission. This was primal. This was survival. Kill or be killed. The pack of zombies would stop at nothing to make it to their prey. 2 soldiers were standing with 2 kneeling in front of them as they fired. The zombies were tripping over the dead bodies as they hit the floor in well-placed bullets. This was causing a never-ending cycle of zombies falling and being trampled as more came from behind to get at the soldiers. They were only about 15 feet away. "Come the fuck on!" Conrad yelled as he began pushing the slow doors open. They could finally enter. Once inside, they pushed a random button. The floor didn't matter. They just needed away from here. The zombies were at the elevator. Conrad pulled out his HK-33 and began popping heads. 3 soldiers began firing. While the other 2 began pushing the corpses out of the small elevator. Ackles was grabbed by one and had a bite taken out of his arm.
Ah! Get it off me!
Rodriguez shot it with his Glock as his HK-33 ran dry. The shot made the zombie attached to Ackles instantly fall, like a puppet with its strings cut. Rodriguez had an idea. It was dangerous, but they didn't have much choice. It was either die or maybe die. Rodriguez popped the pins on his 2 frag grenades and chucked it over the zombies' heads down the hall.
Fire in the hole!
The explosion was extremely loud, as it blew chunks of the dead in all directions, including in the small elevator onto them. The zombies worked as a buffer, keeping them safe from the blast. They only had a few more to contend with, which they quickly dispatched. They pushed the corpses out and pushed the button to close the door again. The door began to close as 2 zombies, 1 male and 1 female, shoved their arms through the small opening. One grabbed Conrad on the arm, and the other grabbed Supervisor Carpenter by the neck. They struggled trying to get them off as the elevator began to move up. To Conrad's shock, the soldiers were helping him and not Carpenter.
Help me! Damn it!
Carpenter screamed through a constricted airway as he shot the arm holding him with his Magnum revolver. Naturally, that did nothing but blow chunks of meat out of its arm and hurt their ears. He was only able to fire twice before panic set in, and he accidentally dropped his gun. In his panic state, he frantically tried to pull the zombie from his neck as he let out a frightened scream from having one of the living dead coiled around him, which quickly turned into a choking sound as the zombie's hand tightened around his throat. They were able to get the arm off Conrad. The zombie just swung wildly, trying to attach to warm flesh. The other arm was pulling Carpenter down with it as the elevator raised. Outside on the 8th floor, the zombies were being lifted off the ground. Their arms locked in the elevator doors. They were being crushed together against the ceiling. It happened in an instant, as a squishing and breaking sound filled soldiers' ears. Their arms broke apart, and the zombies fell back to the floor, moaning in agony. Inside the elevator, the severed arms oozed dark blood with shredded muscle like a tube of toothpaste. Carpenter was now able to pull the hand free, tossing it to the floor, and take in a deep breath as he coughed and sputtered. The bones of the arm were shattered at the break, leaving fragments of bone mingled in the gore-covered elevator. For a moment, Conrad was happy to hear the annoying elevator music again. His relief was short-lived as the elevator began to squeal and lurch to a stop.
Oh, shit!
Conrad exclaimed in frustration. The supervisor walked over and began pressing the buttons. Nothing worked. It had completely stalled. Just like pretty much everything in Raccoon City, it had fallen into disrepair from lazy workers. However, they had no way of knowing this when they entered.
Fine. Let's get this door open.
Carpenter ordered as he kneeled down to pick up his magnum. Ackles pulled out his blade and winced in pain. He shoved it between the door, giving them an opening wide enough for their fingers. Together, they pushed it open and saw they were halfway through the 10th and 11th floor.
Let's go on to the 10th,
Carpenter said, and the men began to crawl out through the bottom. On the 10th floor, the lights were flickering. They paid this no mind and began checking the rooms again one by one. The darkness of the rooms was so thick, it made things only visible by flashlight. The kind of darkness you can feel, threatening to swallow you up. The hall was the only place steadily illuminated by emergency lights leading to the stairs. The soldiers split up to check the rooms. In the hall, a long, sharp tongue slithers its way out of the grated ceiling and wraps itself around Corporal Gordon's throat as he goes to check another room. The pendulous tongue pulls him off his feet into the ceiling as he struggles, gurgling, all the while from being choked. The soldier drops his assault rifle with a loud thud, startling all the soldiers. The men turn around and exit the offices they were checking, aiming their weapons and searching for the source of the noise. Conrad notices the gun on the floor.
Where's Gordon?
Help me!
A loud scream comes from the ceiling and trails off quickly. The soldier had shed his mortal coil. The unforeseen creature lunges its tongue at Conrad, narrowly missing him as he rolled out of the way onto the floor. The men began to fire at the ceiling as more tongues began lurching their way towards the men. One of the creatures falls down to the floor and stops moving. The man's skin was covered in a sickly-looking red. The suit he was wearing was torn and frayed. His hands were mutating into large claws, and Conrad could see the beginnings of claws protruding from his shoes, too. The men kept firing and another fell from the ceiling. A woman, missing most of her hair, fell down dead. Conrad noticed Carpenter slip into an office.
What are you up to?
He thought to himself. No time to worry about that now. Conrad began firing into the ceiling, too. Then two more dropped, and the assault stopped.
Cease fire!
Carpenter yelled as he exited the office, and the men stopped firing. Seemed none of the other men noticed his little side trip, except Conrad. It disgusted him to see his supervisor use them as a diversion.
Is that all of them?
Not sure. We should get out of here and head to the next floor before we find more of those bastards.
The men head up to the next floor via the stairwell, all fearful of what they might find next. They aren't even sure what it was they just saw. The men enter the 11th floor and begin their normal search of each room. Conrad hears a noise from one of the rooms.
I'll check it out. Stay close.
They enter into a large mess hall with a kitchen in the back, weapons at the ready. The whole room was dimly lit by emergency lights here as well.
Is there anyone here?
Conrad calls out anxiously.
There's someone else alive? We thought you were another one of those creatures without eyes.
A woman with long blonde hair and a business suit calls out, stepping out of the kitchen, brandishing a pointy stick from a mop or broom.
You must be one of the executives here. Why did you stay here?
Carpenter asks.
We stayed here because we assumed you'd come for us. You're UBCS. I see we weren't wrong.
I am glad you're here. Food was about to run out.
A man continues. He was holding a kitchen knife. To Conrad's surprise, he realizes there's about 12 people here, all with different types of weapons emerging from the kitchen, except one man in a fancy business suit. He had a handgun sticking out of his belt. Before now, this 1%er only had the gun for show. He barely knew how to fire it. There are several in street clothes here as well. That brought their numbers to 13 survivors. Conrad smiles at this realization. Maybe this mission wouldn't be a waste of time, even if some of them were Umbrella executives. His smile quickly faded as he began to realize the creatures they just fought had eyes, despite being white.
You said the creature without eyes. Did you mean the employees with reddish skin, long tongues, and milky white eyes?
Conrad asks, hoping that's what she meant.
No, the creatures that took out most of us were missing eyes.
The female executive answered.
It has an exposed brain.
A young female with a spear continued.
It did, however, have a long tongue.
The executive with a handgun explained.
Its hands were formed into large claws too, but yeah, absolute no eyes.
A man in a janitor's uniform answered.
The rest of us were taken out by these zombie-like dudes, man. They freaking ate each other. We totally don't go back to the 8th floor at all now. Too many of the dead. We decided to stay here when we started seeing what was on some of the other floors. To add to that, some of the floors have lost power. Fucking annoying. I've been after them to get an electrician here for a while. I can't do my job in IT if there's no power, dude. Guess that doesn't matter anymore.
One of the younger survivors in street clothes explained.
Wish we knew that before we went to the 8th floor.
Ackles said as Rodriguez bandaged his arm, using this moment of safety to their advantage.
That means there's something different than what we faced on the floor below us,
Conrad said a little shakily. What else was out here tonight that the soldiers had never seen before? The soldiers were informed there was no more survivors other than them. Carpenter said they got what they came for, so they headed back to the stairwell and headed down. After they rejoined the other soldiers and Keith in the atrium, the large group exited back out onto Jack Street. Once outside, Carpenter orders them to head on up the road. Conrad was happy to be out of the dimly lit office and back onto the street. He didn't like the feeling it gave him, as if it was some dark mausoleum and all its inhabitants wanted to kill him. Plus, he had begun to perspirate profusely, and the night air was vastly cooler than the warm office building. This street only had a few of the dead to dispatch, so they used their blades to put them down and made their way up the road. At the end of the street, they saw a bar with most of its windows broken out, and its door knocked down to the ground inside. As to what knocked this door open, Conrad didn't even want to venture a guess. Keith spotted it and began running towards it.
JJ's bar! I can get my drink!
Rodriguez, annoyed, tells him to
quiet the fuck down, pendejo. We don't need to make that much goddamn noise.
We can stop in for a moment and rest a bit before we head to the school.
This makes Conrad happy. He could use the break. Inside housed about 8 of the dead. The large group quickly took care of them with ease.
How about a beer, sir? I know I could use one.
Yes, we can all have one, no more. I need you sharp.
The group sits down. Conrad sat here a moment, taking in a deep breath of relief and letting the tension somewhat fade away as his body relaxed. He then pulled out his journal and began writing. September 26th, 1998.
Not having to steal something or kill someone. Having this mission be about rescuing civilians makes me feel like I'm actually making up for my sins. For a change. Like I'm actually the good guy. At least for the moment. We found a place named JJ's Bar. We're taking a brief rest with a beer before heading forward. I don't know how long this strike of good luck will last. Especially with us still being 12 hours out from evac. But I'm glad to have some sort of peace. Even if for a moment. Knowing we're so close to getting these people out of here gives me hope. 12 hours is a long time. I pray I can at least get half of these people to the evac. If I can't, this really will have been a waste of time. I caught Carpenter sneaking off while we were fighting weird creatures in his ceiling. He didn't even help. He just used it all as a way to slink off. The other men didn't see it, but I did. We even lost a man. Gordon was his name. I'm not okay with that. But I'm not sure there's much I can do at the moment. We need all of us to get out of here alive. I just wish I knew what the purpose of him or any of the supervisors being here is. The longer I'm here, the more I find myself hating Umbrella. So many people dead. And it's all due to their negligence and greed. The horrible things I've seen tonight will stay with me as long as I breathe. These people deserved better. I'm still trying to figure out what the fuck we just fought. Some strange, red-looking creature with a long tongue. It's unlike any bioweapons I've ever seen. What the hell is happening here?
Conrad put his journal away in his left pocket, wiped tears from his eyes before anyone saw, and returned to his warm beer. He didn't mind it being warm. The taste was almost soothing to him. Outside, the group could be heard, quietly murmuring, except Keith. Keith was uncontrollable. He was already half drunk, having slammed 5 beers in succession, and laughing at his own stupid jokes. A vague clacking could be heard in the street outside, like talons on concrete. A crimson creature is descending the building next door across the alley. Its long claws, the source of the clacking noise. But a dozen of these beasts are creeping down, drawn to the sound emitting from JJ's bar. Evil may not see, but its ability to hear was unparalleled. Even without Keith, their heightened hearing would have heard the murmuring of the group. Red Death was descending upon them in its purest form. Evil incarnate. The soldiers have never had the grave misfortune of seeing a liquor before, but after the coming encounter, the survivors would know the creature all too well.